Episode 4 of Dutton Ranch Season 1 is shaping up to be the most intense hour of the show so far. And after what we saw at the end of Episode 3, that is really saying something. Beth and Rip are staring down one of the worst crises they have ever faced, and that includes everything that went down in Dillon. The foot and mouth disease situation at Rio Paloma is not going away quietly. If anything, it is just getting started. And on top of that, the drama with Tinpedal Ranch is heating up in ways that nobody saw coming. So let's break down everything you need to know about what to expect in Dutton Ranch Season 1, Episode 4. If you thought Rip putting down that infected cow was the end of the foot and mouth disease problem, think again. Episode 4 is going to force Beth and Rip to sit with a level of uncertainty that neither of them does very well. The quarantine is in place. The rest of the herd is being watched around the clock. But foot and mouth disease does not care about timelines or business plans. It spreads fast, it spreads wide, and there's almost nothing a rancher can do except wait and hope. That waiting game is going to be brutal for this couple. Rip is a man who fixes things. He handles problems with his hands, with decisive action, and with force when he has to. But FMD is not a problem you can muscle through. It is invisible, it is patient, and it can level an entire operation before you even know the full scope of what you're dealing with. Rip is going to be tested in ways that have nothing to do with physical strength or toughness. And Beth? Beth is someone who thrives in the boardroom, who is built for the fast, high-stakes world of business negotiations. She just pulled off a successful deal in Dallas. She came back to Rio Paloma riding high. And now she has walked directly into a disaster that her business instincts cannot solve either. There is no contract to outmaneuver here. There is no rival to outflank. It is just the land, the cattle, and an ugly biological reality that has to play itself out on its own terms. The question going into Episode 4 is whether this thing has already spread further than they know. If even one more animal is showing symptoms, the entire picture changes. We could be looking at total herd loss. And if that happens, Rio Paloma starts to look a lot like Dillon. Another place they poured themselves into. Another place that slipped right through their fingers. While the FMD situation is the most urgent crisis on the table, the Tinpedal Ranch storyline is the one with the most long-term consequences. And Episode 4 is going to push that rivalry into territory that is a lot more personal than a simple land dispute or competing cattle operation. What makes Tinpedal so dangerous is that it is not just a business competitor. It is an organization with deep roots and deep connections in this part of Texas. Beulah Jackson is not someone who just appeared on the scene. She knows this land. She knows how things work out here. And based on what we learned at the end of Episode 3, she also knows Everett. That connection is going to matter more than anyone at Rio Paloma currently understands. Everett has been getting closer to Beth and Rip. He has inserted himself into their world in a way that felt natural, even welcome. But the revelation that he has a prior relationship with Beulah Jackson completely reframes everything. It does not necessarily mean Everett is working against them, but it absolutely means that Beth and Rip need to be asking harder questions about where his loyalties actually sit. And Beth, sharper than anyone when it comes to reading people, is going to have to figure that out fast. Episode 4 should bring some real tension around Everett. Is he a genuine ally who simply has a complicated history? Or is there something more calculated going on? Either answer has enormous implications for what happens next at Rio Paloma. There is another dynamic that has been building quietly throughout this season, and Episode 4 is where it's going to start demanding more attention. Carter's and Oreana's growing closeness is not just a side story. In a world where every alliance and every relationship has potential consequences for the ranch, this is the kind of thing that can spiral quickly. Carter has always occupied an interesting space in this story. He is someone Beth and Rip have taken under their wing, but he is also someone who is still figuring out who he is and where he belongs. Oreana represents a connection to the Tinpedal world, to a different way of doing things out here in Texas. The closer those two get, the more complicated the lines between the two ranches become. And right now, with everything already stretched thin at Rio Paloma, Complications are the last thing Beth and Rip can afford. This is one of those situations where nobody is necessarily doing anything wrong, but the circumstances have a way of forcing impossible choices. Episode 4 is likely to put some real pressure on that dynamic and make it clear that this is not something anyone is going to be able to ignore much longer. That is really the central question of this entire season. And Episode 4 is where the answer starts to come into sharper focus. Not because everything gets resolved, but because the weight of all these overlapping crises is finally going to land on this couple with full force all at once. They are managing a biological disaster that could wipe out their herd. They're trying to figure out who they can actually trust among the people around them. They are navigating a rivalry with a well-established, well-connected neighboring ranch that plays by its own rules. And they're doing all of this while still carrying the grief and frustration of what they lost in Dylan. That loss has never fully been processed. It is sitting underneath everything. Beth and Rip are a formidable team. That is not in question. But Dutton Ranch Season 1 has been making the case that ranching in Texas is a different kind of fight than anything they have faced before. The terrain is unfamiliar. The players are unfamiliar. The rules are different. And the land itself seems to be working against them. Episode 4 is going to show us whether they can adapt fast enough or whether Rio Paloma is heading down the same road as Dylan. A few specific things worth keeping an eye on as this episode unfolds. First, watch the herd. Any new signs of FMD symptoms will be the episode's most critical plot development and will set the stakes for everything that comes after. Second, pay close attention to every scene involving Everett. The writers have clearly been building towards something with his character, and the Beulah-Jackson connection is the key that unlocks what that something actually is. Third, watch Beth. In a crisis, she cannot outmaneuver with money or strategy. She is going to have to find a different gear, and watching her do that is going to be one of the most compelling parts of this episode. The show has been doing a strong job of layering its storylines without letting any one of them take over completely. Episode 4 looks like the moment where all of those layers start to press against each other at once. That kind of narrative pressure is exactly where this series has been headed since the pilot. If episodes 1 through 3 are any indication, the next chapter, Rio Paloma, is not going to give Beth and Rip or the audience any room to breathe. Thanks for watching.